The air buzzed with tension as Captain Will Hayes stood in the command center of Bellerin 4. Holographic maps flickered before him, displaying the overwhelming scale of the incoming Draelic's forces. He adjusted his worn cap and leaned against the edge of the table, his face lit with determination despite the skeptical murmurs surrounding him. "They'll breach the perimeter in 2 hours," said Elena Torres, her voice steady but strained. The fiery colonist stood to his left, her gaze fixed on the display. "And let me guess, those fancy plasma rifles won't even scratch their shields." "Correct," Hayes said flatly. His voice cut through the room like a blade, silencing the whispers of the Concord officers. "Plasma weapons are useless against energy dampeners. We've tried that. You've seen the results." Churax, the alien engineer with wiry limbs and an unnerving habit of clicking his mandibles when nervous, shuffled forward. "Captain Hayes, you speak as though you have an alternative, yet you've provided no evidence to suggest." "I have something," Hayes interrupted, lifting a metallic case onto the table with a grunt. The room turned their attention to the object as he unlatched it, revealing the gleaming parts of a disassembled weapon. "This is your solution." Torres leaned in, her brow furrowing. "What is that? A museum piece?" "Close," Hayes replied. "It's a Gatling gun. Fully mechanical. Fires kinetic projectiles at a rate of thousands per minute. No energy signatures, no electronics, no interference from their fancy dampeners." A ripple of laughter broke out among the Concord officers. One of them, a reptilian figure clad in polished armor, sneered. "You expect us to believe this? Antique will defeat the Draelics? Absurd. They'll sweat it like an insect." Hayes slammed the case shut, his eyes blazing. "That's exactly what they think, and that's exactly why it'll work. They've optimized their defenses against energy weapons, not physical rounds. Their shields are calibrated to plasma. Kinetic force will rip right through." "You're betting lives on a relic," Churax said, shaking his head. "It's irrational. It's survival," Hayes countered. "Every time humans were backed into a corner, we adapted. We've used less to win more. The question isn't whether this will work. The question is whether you're willing to try." The room fell silent. Torres, arms crossed, stepped forward. "All right, I'm in. Someone has to prove these cowards wrong." Hayes nodded, a flicker of gratitude crossing his face. "Good. Churax, I'll need your help assembling it. And we'll need volunteers, people who aren't afraid to fight dirty." Hours later, on the outskirts of the colony, the Gatling gun stood mounted on a makeshift turret, its polished barrel catching the dim sunlight. Hayes inspected the setup, running his hand along the cold metal, his mind racing through contingencies. Torres joined him, carrying a crate of ammunition. "So, what's the plan, Captain? Shoot and pray?" "More or less," Hayes replied. "We lure them into a choke point. When their shields drop, we unleash hell." "You make it sound so simple," she said, smirking. "What if it doesn't work?" Hayes paused, his jaw tightening. "It'll work." The sound of marching boots echoed in the distance. The Draelic's forces emerged over the ridge, their formation precise and intimidating. Rows of soldiers clad in shimmering energy shields advanced like a tidal wave, their weapons glowing ominously. "Positions!" Hayes barked. The colonists scrambled into place, clutching improvised weapons and clutching at scraps of courage. Torres loaded the Gatling gun, her hand steady. "Let's see if your museum piece can do the impossible." The first wave of Draelic soldiers charged forward, their shields absorbing incoming plasma fire with ease. Hayes stood firm, his hand on Torres' shoulder. Hold! The Draelics drew closer, their confidence palpable. One commander, standing atop a hover platform, gestured dismissively toward the human defenses. "Now!" Hayes shouted. The Gatling gun roared to life, its spinning barrels unleashing a storm of bullets. The sound was deafening, a mechanical crescendo that drowned out even the enemy's weapons' fire. The projectiles tore through the Draelic shields like tissue paper, sending the front line into chaos. The Draelic's hesitation was brief but fatal. Their formation broke as they scrambled to regroup, their arrogance replaced by shock. The Gatling gun continued its relentless assault, mowing down wave after wave of soldiers. From the rear, the Draelic's commander shouted orders, his voice panicked. "Adjust shields! Adapt frequencies!" But it was too late. The Gatling gun's barrage was unstoppable, its simplicity impervious to the advanced countermeasures of the Draelic's army. Minutes later, the battlefield fell eerily silent. Smoke hung heavy in the air, mingling with the acrid scent of gunpowder. The ground was littered with the remains of the Draelic's troops, their once impenetrable shields shattered. Hayes stepped forward, his boots crunching on debris. He turned to Torres, who was still gripping the gun's handles, her expression a mix of disbelief and triumph. "Told you it'd work." She laughed, breathless. "Remind me never to doubt you again." Chirax approached, his mandibles clicking furiously. "Captain Hayes, I must admit, I was wrong. This device defies logic. Its effectiveness is undeniable." "It's not about logic," Hayes said, surveying the battlefield. "It's about adaptability. The Draelics rely on predictability. We gave them chaos." A distant rumble drew their attention. Another wave of Draelic's forces appeared on the horizon, this time accompanied by a towering siege walker, its massive frame bristling with weapons. Torres exhaled sharply. "You've got to be kidding me." Hayes smiled grimly. "Good thing I've got a few more tricks up my sleeve." As the colonists prepared for the next battle, Hayes glanced at the Gatling gun, a relic reborn as humanity's lifeline. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a testament to their ingenuity, a reminder that sometimes, the past holds the key to the future. The chatter of distant artillery echoed through the makeshift command tent as Hayes pored over a hand-drawn map of the battlefield. The colony's defenders, farmers, miners, and a smattering of Concord recruits, were scattered across a series of trenches hastily dug into the rocky terrain. The Gatling gun stood at the center of their strategy, its shiny brass components an island of misplaced confidence amid the grim faces of those who had seen too much war. Hayes slammed a fist on the table, rattling the crude models representing enemy units. "They'll expect us to fall back under their first charge. That's what we want them to think. But this time, they're walking into a trap." Chirax clicked his mandibles, his dark eyes narrowing. "Captain Hayes, while your confidence is infectious, their siege walkers are equipped with adaptive shielding. The kinetic advantage may not hold. That's why we aim low," Hayes said, drawing an X across the map. "Take out the legs, disable their mobility, and they're just a big target waiting to be dismantled. You humans do love a gamble," Chirax muttered. Torres, leaning against the edge of the table with her arms crossed, scoffed. "It's not gambling if you know how to count cards. Hayes knows what he's doing. At least, I hope you do." "Hope doesn't win battles," Hayes said, meeting her gaze. "Preparation does. Speaking of which, how's ammunition?" Torres pushed off the table and gestured to a crate stacked against the tent wall. "Enough for one sustained engagement. After that, we're fighting with shovels and bad language." "Then we make it count," Hayes said. "Every round." A runner burst into the tent, his face flushed with exertion. "Captain? The Draelic's advance units are in sight, 2 clicks out. They're moving faster this time." Hayes grabbed his rifle and straightened. "Good. Let them come." Outside, the colony buzzed with frantic energy. Defenders scrambled into position, their movements stiff with fear but driven by a determination that only desperation could summon. The trenches were shallow, lined with whatever materials the colony had to spare, old crates, planks, even chunks of reinforced concrete from collapsed buildings. The horizon shimmered with heat as the Draelic's forces approached. Unlike their first assault, this wave was smaller, more compact, a spearhead designed to punch through weak points in the colony's defenses. At its center loomed the unmistakable silhouette of a siege walker, its legs cutting deliberate strides into the earth, as its energy cannons swiveled in readiness. Hayes climbed onto the nearest trench line, surveying the enemy through a pair of binoculars. "Torres, are we ready?" The crackle of her voice came through his calm. "Locked and loaded." "Say the word." "Not yet," Hayes replied, his voice calm despite the pounding in his chest. "Let them get comfortable." The Draelix walker fired first, a blast of energy streaking toward the colony's barricades. The explosion sent debris flying, a deafening roar that shook the ground. The colonists ducked instinctively, but Hayes didn't flinch. He kept his eyes on the walker, watching for a pattern in its movements. Another blast followed, then another, each strike more precise than the last. The Draelix infantry moved in tandem, their shields shimmering as they closed the gap. Plasma fire from the trenches barely scratched the surface of their defenses, the bright green bolts fizzling out against the protective barriers. Hayes lowered his binoculars and grabbed his comm. Now! The Gatling gun came alive with a roar, its barrels spinning faster than the eye could follow. The first volley tore through the air, ripping into the Draelix front line. Shields designed to withstand plasma discharges crumpled under the kinetic assault, their generators sparking as soldiers collapsed in heaps of shattered armor and flesh. Torres whooped through the comm, her voice rising over the cacophony. "They're folding! I can't believe this is actually working!" "Stay focused," Hayes snapped. "They're not done yet." The walker shifted its attention toward the Gatling gun, its cannons charging for a devastating shot. Hayes saw the glow intensify and shouted into his comm. "Torres, move now!" She ducked just as the energy beam obliterated the position she had occupied moments before. The force of the blast sent dirt and shrapnel flying, but the Gatling gun remained intact, its sturdy construction a testament to its old-world design. Chirax's voice cut in. "Captain, the walker is adapting. Its shields are recalibrating to kinetic impacts." "Then we improvise," Hayes growled. He turned to the nearest group of colonists. "Diversion team on me. We're taking out those legs." The group hesitated, their faces pale with terror, but Hayes's commanding presence galvanized them into action. Grabbing rocket launchers and grenades, they sprinted through the trenches, moving parallel to the walker's path. The machine's cannons swiveled again, firing indiscriminately as the Gatling gun continued its assault. Torres held her ground, squeezing the triggers with a mix of fury and exhilaration. "Come on, you oversized toaster! Is that all you've got?" Hayes and his team reached the edge of the trench line, crouching behind a makeshift barricade. He signaled for them to spread out, each member taking a position along the walker's blind spot. "Aim for the joints," he ordered. "When it goes down, hit it with everything you've got." A rocket streaked through the air, slamming into the walker's front leg. The explosion rocked the massive machine, causing it to stumble but not collapse. Another rocket followed, this time striking the rear joint. The walker faltered, its movements jerky and uncoordinated. "Now!" Hayes shouted. The colonists unleashed a barrage of grenades, each one detonating against the walker's vulnerable joints. With a metallic groan, the machine toppled forward, its cannons firing one last desperate blast into the dirt before falling silent. Cheers erupted from the trenches as the Draelix infantry scrambled to retreat, their formation broken and their morale shattered. The Gatling gun spun to a halt, smoke rising from its overheated barrels. Torres climbed out of her trench, brushing dirt off her face as she approached Hayes. "You know, for a plan that had a 90% chance of getting us all killed, that went surprisingly well." Hayes smirked, his adrenaline finally giving way to exhaustion. "Never tell me the odds." Chirax clicked his mandibles as he inspected the remains of the walker. "Captain Hayes, I must admit, your species has an uncanny ability to turn chaos into strategy." "Compliments later," Hayes said, slinging his rifle over his shoulder. "We've won the day, but they'll be back. Let's make sure we're ready." As the colonists began tending to their wounded and salvaging what they could, Hayes stood amidst the wreckage, the glow of victory tempered by the weight of what was yet to come. The Gatling gun, a relic of humanity's past, had proven its worth once again. But the war was far from over, and Hayes knew that their greatest weapon wasn't a machine, it was their unyielding will to survive. The tension in the command tent was palpable as the aftershocks of the battle rippled through the camp. Hayes leaned over the map table, his hands braced against its edges, while Torres paced furiously nearby. Chirax, with his usual methodical calm, tinkered with a damaged projectile casing, his mandibles clicking in thought. "They're regrouping," Torres said, breaking the silence. "You know they'll come back with something worse. That walker was just the opening act." Hayes nodded grimly, his eyes fixed on the map. "We rattled them, but we didn't break them. They'll be planning for us now, trying to adapt. Then we have to adapt faster," Torres shot back. "Because unless you've got another Gatling gun hidden somewhere, this thing isn't surviving another round." Hayes straightened and turned to Chirax. "What's the status on the modifications?" The alien engineer's antennae twitched. "The weapon performed admirably, but its durability is limited. Prolonged firing has caused critical stress to the barrel assembly. Replacement parts, well, they don't exist." Hayes ran a hand through his hair. "Then we'll reinforce what we've got. Find a workaround. Weld scrap metal if you have to. I don't care how ugly it looks as long as it works." "Ah, yes," Chirac said dryly. "The human approach to engineering, pragmatism over aesthetics." Torres slapped her hands against the table. "We don't need pretty. We need survival. Let's focus on the next attack, because it's coming, and it's coming fast." Before Hayes could respond, a scout burst into the tent, his face pale. "Captain? Incoming transmission from the Dralic's command ship. They're demanding to speak with you." Hayes exchanged a wary glance with Torres before nodding. "Put it through." The tent's calm screen flickered to life, revealing a Dralic's officer clad in shimmering black armor. His scaled face was impassive, but his slitted eyes gleamed with thinly veiled contempt. "Captain Hayes, is it? Or shall I address you as the leader of this doomed rabble?" "Call me what you want," Hayes said, folding his arms. "What do you want, Dralix?" The alien's lips curled into a sneer. "A chance to offer you a swift and honorable end. Surrender now, and your people will be spared needless suffering. Continue this futile resistance, and you will face annihilation." Hayes tilted his head, feigning contemplation. "You know, I was thinking of surrendering. But then I remembered something. Your troops running like scared children the last time we fought." The Dralic's officer's expression darkened. "You are mistaken if you believe your primitive relics can withstand the might of the Empire. This is your only warning, Captain." Hayes stepped closer to the screen, his voice low and deliberate. "Here's my warning, bring everything you've got. Because the next time you send your troops, they're not leaving." The transmission cut abruptly, leaving the tent in silence. Torres let out a low whistle. "You've got a death wish, don't you?" "No," Hayes said, turning back to the map. "But I want them angry. Angry means reckless. Reckless means mistakes." Chirax rubbed his mandibles together. "And what happens when their anger turns into overwhelming firepower?" Hayes pointed to a series of marks on the map. "That's where strategy comes in. They think they're the hunters, but we're laying the traps." Hours later, the defenders moved into position under the cover of darkness. The trenches were abandoned, leaving only decoys and bait to draw the Dralic's forces into a series of narrow valleys lined with explosive charges. Hayes crouched beside Torres near the Gatling gun, now mounted on a reinforced swivel platform scavenged from an agricultural harvester. "Think this'll work?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the wind. "It has to," Hayes replied. "We're out of options." The first signs of the Dralic's approach came as distant flashes of light, the hum of engines growing louder with each passing moment. Hayes raised his binoculars, his jaw tightening as he saw not one but two siege walkers flanking an even larger unit, a mobile command fortress bristling with turrets and shield generators. Torres swore under her breath. "How the hell are we supposed to stop that?" "We don't," Hayes said. "We make them stop themselves." The Dralic's forces advanced with calculated precision, their formations tighter and more cautious than before. The walkers fired sporadically, testing for hidden defenses. Hayes's fingers hovered over the detonator in his hand as the first wave entered the valley. "Wait for it," he muttered, his knuckles white against the device. The lead walker's foot triggered a pressure plate, setting off the first charge. A thunderous explosion ripped through the valley, collapsing rock walls and cutting off the rear guard. Chaos erupted as the Dralic soldiers scrambled to adapt, their once impenetrable formation fragmented. "Now!" Hayes shouted. The Gatling gun roared to life, cutting through the disoriented infantry like a scythe. Torres guided the weapon with ruthless efficiency, her hands steady despite the relentless vibrations. Chirax, perched nearby, monitored the weapon's overheating levels, barking warnings when it neared its limit. The Dralic's command fortress retaliated, unleashing a barrage of energy blasts that lit up the night sky. One shot struck dangerously close to the Gatling gun, sending dirt and debris raining down. Hayes pulled Torres back as she coughed through the dust. "They're targeting us," she said, her voice hoarse. "That's the point," Hayes replied. He activated his comm, addressing the scattered defenders. "Diversion teams, hit them from the flanks. Keep them guessing." Explosions erupted on both sides of the valley as the colonists launched their improvised counterattacks. The Dralic's forces struggled to maintain cohesion, their superior technology rendered ineffective against the guerrilla tactics. But the command fortress continued its advance, its shields deflecting everything thrown at it. Hayes clenched his jaw, his mind racing. "Chirax, how long until the gun overheats?" 3 minutes, give or take," the alien replied. "That's enough," Hayes said. "Torres, get ready for a final push." She hesitated, her eyes darting to the fortress. "You can't be serious. That thing's untouchable." "Not if we take out its power source," Hayes said. "Aim for the base of the shield generator. One good hit, and the rest will crumble." Torres nodded, her determination overriding her fear. She swung the Gatling gun toward the fortress, her finger hovering over the trigger. The weapon screamed as it unleashed its final barrage, each round slamming into the shield generator with unrelenting force. The fortress shuddered, its shields flickering before collapsing entirely. A cheer erupted from the defenders as the massive structure ground to a halt, its systems failing one by one. Hayes lowered his rifle, his chest heaving with exhaustion. "They'll think twice before underestimating us again." Torres grinned, her face streaked with dirt and sweat. "They'll think twice about everything." Chirax clicked his mandibles approvingly. "For a species so fond of chaos, you are remarkably effective." Hayes smirked, his gaze fixed on the smoldering wreckage of the Dralic's forces. "That's humanity for you. We thrive in the chaos." The camp was quiet in the aftermath of the battle. The surviving colonists moved through the trenches, some dragging the wounded to the medical tents while others salvaged ammunition and supplies from what remained of the battlefield. Hayes stood near the Gatling gun, his arms crossed, eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. Torres approached, her face smudged with dirt and her shoulders heavy with exhaustion. "That was too close," she said, dropping onto a nearby crate. "If they had one more walker, we wouldn't be having this conversation. We'll make sure they don't get the chance," Hayes replied, his voice steady but low. "This isn't over yet. They're regrouping, and when they come back, they'll hit us harder." "Do you ever stop thinking 2 steps ahead?" she asked, smirking despite herself. "I don't have the luxury to stop," Hayes said. He crouched beside her, his voice softening. "Neither do you." Chirax approached, his mandibles clicking in a rhythm that Hayes recognized as contemplation. "Captain, while our recent victory has bought us time, our resources are critically low. Ammunition, in particular, is depleted to unsustainable levels." "I figured," Hayes said, standing. "That's why we're going on the offensive." Torres straightened, her brows knitting together. "You can't be serious. We barely survived their last wave. Now you want to attack?" "We don't have a choice," Hayes replied. "The Dralics won't stop until we're wiped out. If we sit here and wait, they'll crush us. But if we take the fight to them, we can catch them off guard." Chirax tilted his head. "A bold strategy, but do we possess the means to execute it?" Hayes pulled out a map and spread it on the nearby table. He pointed to a narrow pass leading to the Dralic staging area. "Their command center is here. If we take it out, we cut off their supply lines and cripple their ability to coordinate. They'll have to retreat. And how exactly are we supposed to do that with a busted Gatling gun and a handful of farmers? Torres asked, her skepticism sharp. With creativity, Hayes said. We'll rig what we have into makeshift explosives. Use the terrain to our advantage. Chirax, I need you to modify the remaining ammunition into something that can pack a bigger punch. The alien engineer nodded, his mandibles twitching with excitement. It will be challenging, but not impossible. Torres sighed, rubbing her temples. All right, fine. Let's say we pull this off. How do we even get close enough to plant the explosives without being seen? We use the distraction they gave us, Hayes said with a grim smile. Their arrogance. They think we're licking our wounds. They won't expect us to strike now. The plan came together quickly, each colonist assigned a role. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the small strike team moved silently through the shadows, carrying their makeshift explosives and scavenged weapons. Hayes led the way, his rifle slung across his back, every step measured and deliberate. Torres stayed close, her sharp eyes scanning the path ahead for patrols. When they reached the edge of the Dralic's encampment, Hayes motioned for the team to halt. The camp was bustling with activity, Dralic soldiers moving in rigid formations, their vehicles lined up in precise rows. At the center stood the command center, a towering structure glowing with energy. This is it, Hayes whispered. Chirax, get those charges ready. Torres, cover the perimeter. Chirax quickly set to work, his nimble fingers assembling the charges with precision. Torres took up a position overlooking the camp, her rifle steady as she watched for any signs of movement. The rest of the team fanned out, planting the explosives at key points around the camp. As Hayes placed the final charge near a cluster of fuel cells, he felt a prickle of unease. The camp was too quiet, the usual Dralic's chatter absent. He glanced toward Torres, who gave a subtle nod, signaling that the coast was clear. The silence shattered as a spotlight swept over their position, followed by the sharp crack of a warning siren. Hayes cursed under his breath, his fingers flying to his calm. They've spotted us! Detonators now! The first explosion rocked the camp, a fireball engulfing one of the Dralic's vehicles. Chaos erupted as soldiers scrambled to respond, their formations breaking under the sudden assault. Hayes and his team opened fire, taking advantage of the confusion to push toward the command center. Torres covered their advance, her rifle picking off targets with deadly precision. Move! I've got you! Chirax carried a charge toward the base of the command center, his movements swift despite the heavy fire. Hayes followed close behind, laying down suppressive fire as they reached the structure. The alien engineer quickly affixed the explosive, his mandibles clicking rapidly as he activated the timer. Charge is set! Chirax called out. We must retreat immediately. Go! Hayes shouted, covering the team as they fell back toward the tree line. The Dralic's forces were in disarray, their commanders shouting conflicting orders as explosions continued to ripple through the camp. When they reached a safe distance, Hayes turned to Torres, who held the detonator. Do it! She pressed the button without hesitation, and the night lit up as the command center exploded in a blinding flash of light. The shockwave sent a gust of heat and dust through the air, and the team watched as the structure collapsed in on itself, taking the Dralic's command with it. Cheers erupted among the team, but Hayes remained silent, his eyes fixed on the smoldering ruins. It's not over, he said, his voice cutting through the celebration. They'll regroup. But now, they'll know we're not easy prey. Torres clapped him on the shoulder, her expression weary but determined. You've got a hell of a way of proving that, Captain. Chirax nodded, his mandibles clicking in approval. A most unconventional approach, yet undeniably effective. Truly, humanity thrives under pressure. Hayes allowed himself a faint smile, the weight of the victory tempered by the knowledge of the battles still to come. Let's head back. We've got a lot of work to do. As the team disappeared into the shadows, leaving the destroyed camp behind, Hayes felt a flicker of hope. They had turned the tide, however briefly, and proved that ingenuity and resilience could stand against even the mightiest forces. Humanity, against all odds, would endure.